Uh, Hello everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for being here today. I'm going to be talking about a specific dragon of Tolkien and how it relates to Norse myth. So, since it's a fantasy focused conference, I'm going to assume the Tolkien part of the story is mostly well known, and I'm going to spend a little more time explaining the Norse myth of it. And so, let's jump into it. My goal will be to not as much point out the parallels between Glaurung, this dragon, and Fáfnir from Norse myth, because those are very well known. But rather I would try to look at Glaurung as an instance of a mythic dragon in Tolkien's corpus. And so, going from some premises, which are that in Old Norse legends, there is this dragon, Fáfnir, that is fought by a hero, Sigurdur. And he is he's considered the quintessential dragon. So he's present in many sources through the ages. He appears in several shapes and sizes, but he is the most influential dragon that exists. And all the other texts drink from Fáfnir, and all the other dragons are compared to him in a way. And so, at the same time, Fáfnir is presented as the closest model for Glaurung. And so, what I want to see here is, are there continuities between Tolkien's treatment of Fáfnir, because he talks a lot about Old Norse myth and dragons, as he was an Old Norse scholar, as is well known. Are there continuities between how he talks about Fáfnir and how he creates Glaurung? And at the same time, does Glaurung manifest in the legendarium similarly to Fáfnir in the medieval legendary tradition? So the way that it is presented, the form and the several versions and all that. And can Glaurung be considered the Fáfnir of Tolkien's legendarium, his quintessential dragon to judge all others by? Is Glaurung the mythic dragon of Middle-earth? So I'll first present Fáfnir very briefly, then comment about what Tolkien said about dragons, and present Glaurung and judge him by the previous things that I have said before. I'll have a lot of text. I'll not read every single thing of it, but let's get going. So Fáfnir, what's the story of Fáfnir? I have here a brief description, very bare bones. So a poisonous and sorcerous dragon sleeps on top of a hoard. Later, near a river, he is stabbed by a young hero who hides in a recess below. The story contains a helmet connected to dragons and a legendary sword that is used to slay the dragon. After being struck, the dragon speaks with the hero, delivering words of doom that prove true. The hero is onwards known as the bane of that dragon. So what I did here was take away everything else. This is very bare bones. This applies both to Fáfnir and to Glaurung. And so you can see the comparison straight from the beginning. Of course, they are very different stories, but the dragon has a lot of similar motifs. And Fáfnir is not only famous in Old Norse legend, but also in a wider Germanic tradition, an oral tradition that was shared by the Germanic peoples. So it is mentioned in Beowulf. Aside from the Beowulf dragon, we also have a small mention about a dragon killed by Sigmund the Welsing in Old English. And that dragon is Fáfnir, although Fáfnir is only named like that in the Old Norse sources, not in the continental Germanic tradition. So he appears in skaldic poems, which use very metaphorical, poetical ways of speaking about things, like the Cannings, if you are familiar with them. There are pictorial representations of Fáfnir, or at least they are interpreted as such because we know about the story, and they are often older than the story in the versions that it reached us. The Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda both mention the story of Fáfnir and the Volsung. Nibelungenlied, the German version of the story where Sigurdur is called Siegfried, that's also very well known. And of course, I could go on. Wagner with the Nibelung cycle also picks up Siegfried. There's a German version, actually a Norse translation of German versions called Thidreks Saga of Bern, and Volsunga Saga, which is, I underline because it is kind of the canonical version, or at least the most coherent and complete version that reached us from the end of the 13th century, although the manuscript is Norwegian and later from the 14th century. And then there are a lot of other old Icelandic texts which mention this dragon, or which make use of the motifs from this dragon legend. And this is one of the oldest depictions that is thought to be Fáfnir, of a serpent being stabbed by a hero. And serpents and dragons in Middle Ages are two words that can be referred to the same thing. Often the dragons don't have wings, as we will see. So this is just one example of a skaldic poem. These are very intricate. We use a lot of metaphors. So to refer to a sword, for example, they say the sunbeam of the land of Gunur, which means Valkyrie, Gunur, that is. And so this is, the land of Gunur is the shield. The sunbeam, which hits that land, is a sword. So this is the expression for sword. And so there are expressions like this for serpent that refer to Fáfnir. And we know this is the right story because at the end of the poem it says, the battle-daring leader proceeds to amuse himself with roasting. And at the end of this legend, after Sigurdur kills the dragon, he roasts the heart in a pot. That's depicted in the number 1 of that picture stone over there. He is roasting the heart, he scalds his finger, he takes it to his mouth, and magically, because he tastes the blood of the dragon, he begins to understand the speech of birds. And so just an example of how fragmentary sometimes these versions of the dragon reaches. And Fáfnir changes through the ages. In Fáfnir's Maul, which is the Eddic version, it said that Fáfnir slithered over the pit, and Sigurd stabbed him to the heart with his sword. And so there's a pit that Sigurdur the hero dug, and as the dragon goes to drink, Sigurdur stabs him from below. So we assume that he was going close to the ground and was slithering like a snake. In Völsunga Saga, which is a later version, it said that Sigurd thrust in the sword under the left shoulder. So now we have a dragon with limbs. And this is an evolution from the Middle Ages of a classical idea of a dragon, of a huge snake, or in old Germanic legend as well, a huge snake. And it gains hybrid qualities. The dragon gains limbs and sometimes wings. And here in this 12th century Norwegian state church, this is a very well-known image to people who read Tolkien as well, because it's the cover of Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. And Sigurd is stabbing Fáfnir. And we can see that he has on the upper right corner a claw, so a limbed dragon. And some people say that at the extreme top right corner, that crisscross texture is a wing, but that's damaged, so we don't actually know. So maybe in this version, the artist imagined Fáfnir with wings even, which is very contrary to the legend, actually. And so just some topics of the saga of the Volsungs. And these are all things that Tolkien picks up for Lord of the Rings. Gandalf is very inspired by the figure of Odin in the sagas, for example. But what matters most is that there's a cursed treasure, there's a poisonous dragon, there's a helm of terror that is related to dragons, and the hero, Sigurdur Fáfnisbani, which means the bane of Fáfnir, who kills the dragon and becomes immortal in fame because of it. So he is the son of Hreidmar, Fáfnir. He used to be a man. He kills his father for a treasure and becomes a dragon. His brother, the smith Regin, which is sometimes a dwarf, encourages Sigurdur to kill Fáfnir to get treasure for himself. And after dying, just before dying actually, Fáfnir shares some mythological wisdom and says that the treasure will be the doom of Sigurdur. Sigurdur roasts the heart, gains some magical powers, sometimes understanding birds, sometimes his skin becomes hard as like a horn of an animal or something, and he will die in the end. And so Fáfnir turns into a dragon because of his greed, of his malice, and his sorcery, depending on the version. And he is also an embodiment of fear itself. The dragon is the ultimate challenge that the Germanic hero faces. This is very important. There is a lot of emphasis on fear. Nobody else would dare to fight the dragon, but he did, and so he became immortal. Well, metaphorically, of course. Fáfnir's isolation and malice is very highlighted. He grew so malevolent that he went off to live in the wilds and allowed none but himself to have any pleasure in the riches, and later on he turned into a terrible dragon. And then he maintains this isolation because he raises the crest of terror above all men, and he breathes poison around him, so he creates this wasteland of poison and fear that nobody dares go to. So, just an example of how, of a quote, after he kills the dragon, Regin tells Sigurdur that his great deed will live for as long as the world shall last. And then in the Thedrach Saga translation, in the Spanish translation, and apologies for my accent, but it is said, the narrator says that Sigurdur es muy famoso por haber matado al enorme dragón que los varegos llaman Fáfnir. Su nombre recorre todas las lenguas al norte del mar de Grecia, y así será mientras el mundo dure. So it is until when the world ends, then only then will the fame end. And this is the version that, and this is kind of true because we are still talking about this dragon. There are traditional Faroese ballads that are not that old and they are still sung while dancing. It's called the Sjurðar kvæði, and Sjurður is the Faroese version of Sigurður. It's just about how the Sigurður killed the dragon, and they still dance it nowadays as a tradition. And of course, there are redux versions for children of this story. One of them was edited by Andrew Lang in the Red Fairy book in 1890, and this is predictably how I pivot into Tolkien, because Tolkien read the version when he was a child, this version by Andrew Lang, and he talks about it in his letters. So I will not read what is in there. It's basically the same story with some small details that are changed. So Lang doesn't mention that you have to strike that you have to stab the dragon from below, which is obvious, but he doesn't say anything about it. But anyway, so one of Tolkien's first fascination in terms of imagination and stories was Fáfnir. He says in a letter that since in early boyhood he was also interested in traditional tales, especially those concerning dragons. And on Fairy Stories in 1939, he elaborates and speaks about the Andrew Lang version that he read as a kid, and how the best of all stories was the nameless North of Sigurd of the Volsungs and the Prince of all Dragons, this idea that Fáfnir is the greatest dragon there is. And in another letter, comparing the Beowulf dragon to Fáfnir, Tolkien says that Fáfnir was better, and Smaug has a lot to owe to Fáfnir there. So Tolkien also gave a lecture on dragons in 1938 to children. So this is very simple language, but he made it very clear what he expected to see in a dragon. So he talks a little bit about the size and how winged dragons are very alarming, but the most evil have no wings. About the greed and hatred that the dragons symbolize, and that to defeat one you need courage. They can only be defeated by brave men, usually alone. They are the final test of heroes. So in Beowulf and the Monsters and the Critics, which is a seminal lecture about Beowulf, Tolkien says that dragons, real dragons, so he makes a distinction. Some dragons are just there to be killed in an instant and be gone, but real dragons are essential to the machinery of the tale. And they are actually quite rare, he says. And that's how he dismisses about 50 dragons in old Icelandic texts that have dragons. He thinks they don't count. I disagree, but okay. So dragons are above all, they are filled with malice. They make deserts and rejoice in destruction. And they seek to bind your will and devil in magic. And so this is just a summary, basically. They are physically imposing, they are magical, they create wastes. But Tolkien still likes dragons to be like the Germanic ones. They are greedy and makers of heroes. But most of all, he really wants them to be characters that are evil. They are consciously and concretely evil. They are not just symbols of death or of evil itself. And so Tolkien changes Fáfnir in his own version of the legend that he calls Völsungarkvíða and Nia, the new poem of the Volsungs, which is published in the Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. And so the introduction is the same. When Fáfnir is stabbed, he starts by exclaiming that who is this boy that stabbed me, basically, and he asks about the identity of Sigurd. And so Tolkien makes changes here from the medieval versions. Because in Fáfnir's Mál, he says, Sigurd says, "My lineage, I declare, will be unknown to you as am I myself." Immediately after he says, "Sigurd I am called, Sigmund was my father." So this doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't quite know what happened here. Maybe several versions being transmitted at the same time. The same thing happens in Völsunga Saga. And Tolkien just makes him say, "My sire was Sigmund, seed of Völsung." He does not say his own name. Because you're not supposed to say your name, it's in the last slide, to a dying enemy. They will curse you. This is a belief in Old Norse, in the World Norse worldview. Fáfnir is also changed into this kind of dreamer, this schemer that is not in the medieval. He's just a brash figure that attacks and rages, and an evil man, really, antisocial. And here Fáfnir dreams of gold before he's turned into a dragon. After he's a dragon, he dreams of evil, and then he lays just by the fire, fiercely dreaming. So it's more cerebral, a more cerebral dragon than the medieval one. So Glaurung, to go really fast, I'll skip some slides. Sorry about that. Basically, it manifests in the chronology just like Fáfnir does in a variety of different versions. First as only a note in 1915, and then a series of versions in a poem, an earlier version from 1980, and then at the end we can see the canonical versions of Turin Turambar, which is very like a synopsis of sorts, that Silmarillion style, and the Children of Húrin, which is the most extensive one. Okay, sorry, I have to move here. Oh, it's moving there, but not in my screen. Okay, sorry. Okay, very good. So, in Turambar and the Fóaloki, the first version, the Old Norse influences are more evident. The dragon is dreaming upon the hoards and the treasure, and the treasure and the greed associated is also present for a motivation for Thingol to help Morwen. And so, well, I'll skip this basically, but Tolkien puts in the text that whoever tastes the blood of dragons might understand birds. This disappears in later versions. There's a hierarchy of dragons that is presented, where some are more mighty than others, and at first it is said that the winged ones are weaker than the fiery ones and the crawling ones. And in the Lay of the Children of Húrin, which is an alliterative poem, we almost don't see a dragon because it's very fragmentary. And so basically we just have some details, and the dragon helm, which is instead of worn by the dragon, it becomes this mockery of the dragon. In the later versions, he increases in evil and might progressively. And he is always the first dragon, the first of the Uroloki, the father of dragons. He devastates Ethelivrin. He is the final test of heroes. And I'm going to start closing in. Turin Turambar Dagnir Glaurunga. After Turin kills him, it is said that he is Glaurung's bane. And this is a stone that will endure in Middle-earth even after Beleriand is completely flooded. So it is eternal fame for Turin for this one deed. And so, well, I'm going to skip this because it's just about how Glaurung was very magical and evil, and we all know that. Some significant differences to close just my conclusions. So Glaurung was not a previous human, so Tolkien doesn't want that. He wants dragons that are reptiles from the beginning. Glaurung is made by Morgoth and always obeys him. Old Norse dragons are more self-centered. And also, Glaurung is more directly responsible for the death of Turin. So, to conclude, are there continuities between the treatments of the dragons? Yes. Tolkien makes his principles very clear in several lectures, and most of all in his fiction, and they apply to Glaurung as well. He also manifests in the Legendarium in several versions that change throughout the years, so this is very mythical in a way, and very akin to how medieval tradition and myth develops. But is he the quintessential dragon? I'm not quite sure, because other dragons show up that kind of steal the show. And I'm talking, of course, about Ancalagon and Smaug. And so, Smaug is an excellent real dragon. This is my last slide. He is very evil in all the ways that Tolkien likes, and makes a desert, of course, the devastation of Smaug. However, he is also more popular than Glaurung. In that way, he is quintessential. He is the dragon that we know from Tolkien. And Calagon in the universe is the ultimate evolution of dragons. He is capable, he is the one in the last battle. However, he's not very developed, so he's not essential to the detail. He's not a real dragon. And Glaurung is the first Middle-earth dragon, both as a literary creation of Tolkien and as a creation of Morgoth. And he is the one that sticks closer to Old Norse legends, and maybe he is the most evil of the dragons and the one that shows more of his character in that way. So I thank you for your attention. Sorry, this was very rushed. I prepared for a longer presentation somehow. I would love to hear what you think is the quintessential dragon in Middle-earth. So thank you.